Hey folks, greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with another episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. Today we have Mark Brophy on the podcast today. Mark, how's it going?
Very well. Thanks for asking, man. How are you?
Good. Happy New Year to you and to everybody else. This is our first new podcast of the new year, our first podcast of the new year. Last couple of weeks, we'd have had some replays. We've had some time off, taken time to reflect and enjoy some relaxation. But we're back at it. So in this episode, as the title suggests, we're going to talk about winter storms and kind of the parallels between the winter storms that have kind of been ravaging the country on the Northeast and kind of the South and almost, Kansas and Texas and places like that. We're going to talk about that and kind of frame it in the lens of cybersecurity, right? We'll talk about the importance of preparation and layered defenses. That's a theme that's going to come up. We're going to talk about resilience and kind of monitoring. We're going to talk through some of these lessons, some of these key things that we think are important for cybersecurity and kind of make some analogies to these winter storms and preparing for them. And of course, Mark, this can be not just winter storms. This could be fires. This could be any natural disaster. I think there's a lot of parallels between, environmental or, natural disaster preparedness and cybersecurity. I think there's a lot of common themes and common threads that you can draw parallels to. So hopefully everybody enjoys this episode. Hopefully it helps people kind of start their gears turning, help get their gears turning, especially in the new year, and help guide and give you some information or some things to think about as you're preparing your security strategy, as you're working through new plans or looking at new investment or new technology. Hopefully this is a good conversation for you to kind of grease the wheels, so to speak, on that. So the first step naturally in anything, right, Mark, I think is preparation, right? You see this a lot with incident response. I see this a lot from a pen testing perspective, different cases. But when it comes to storms, right, winter storms and things like that, preparation, what that looks like is stocking up on, essentials, right? Having some food in your pantry, maybe having some water, securing your home, right? Closing doors and windows in the winter storms, things like that, planning. So curious your thoughts, Mark, to start off, like preparation, right? What are your thoughts on preparation and how it kind of correlates to, storm and natural disaster preparedness?
Yeah, I think if people treat their homes almost like a business, in the fact that you do your own risk assessment, the term we use in business and resilience is business impact analysis. Preparing for things, the word preparation can mean a lot of things, but what's a beneficial preparation, right? Is filling sandbags in an area where you're not going to be flooded, is that useful time and energy and resources? Mm-hmm. No. So, now you need to prepare, but what tasks could be the most beneficial and meaningful? And not just running to Walmart and buy gallons of water up every time, so yep. Looking at what's likelihood for you, what's going to happen to you, the greater likelihood, and then prioritize what do I need to have. In businesses, we prioritize, assets for, running the business and continuing the operations and generating revenue. Whereas at home, we may look at things as far as life, safety, comforts, as far as water, food, heat, stuff of that nature. So how do we prepare for stuff around that, or at least make mental items? Back in October, then I was down here in the South where storms hit and tornadoes. I'm about a couple hundred miles from Asheville, and those poor people. So my community was out power for 14 hours. Neighborhoods around me were out power for a week, 2 weeks. So you quickly assessed, what you had around. And I knew, I had some pieces of equipment in my home that were capable of being battery run packs on the background. I have a, yep. One of those jump starter car packs. Well, it has USB ports on the side. So I was able to plug in my phones and plug in things that I needed to run off of USB power. Yep. During that time frame. So quite honestly, having a day to be disconnected from the internet wasn't a bad thing, but we were still available. We had our phones powered in case of emergency, in case we got the evacuate SMS messages or any of that nature, but just making note of that, preparing for that, was, it's key, but again, preparing the right way,
Yep.
like right now, DOT crews down here in the South, they're posting photos of their crews getting ready for incoming storms, and the photos are showing our dry roads and they're laying salt down. Well, you growing up in knowing the snow region know that you don't put salt down until there's moisture on the ground, because else the salt's going to run off in the ditches. And I've seen that. I've seen too many times. I follow a truck down here in the South, and by the fourth car passes it, all the salt that they put down the road is in the ditch. So they're doing preparation, but it's not an effective preparation. So, you kind of have to know what you're doing and do it the right way when you're
Yep.
prepping stuff.
Yeah, definitely. For when it comes to preparation, you obviously, like you said, have to prepare for the right things, in the right way, and that's a very important piece. And to your point, you want to have the experience, and experience is a real thing when it comes to preparation, and that's why we turn to people who are experts and have experience in those things to help us prepare for those things. So in the cybersecurity context, maybe you hire a firm to help with a disaster recovery plan and a business impact analysis, and kind of figure out where the key pieces are, what threats you need to be worried about, and then ultimately how to prepare for when a security incident happens or a data breach happens or things like that. So preparation is obviously key. I think there's the saying that an ounce of preparation is worth a pound of cure or something like that. And I think that is very real and very true. Another one I like is the time to have the plan is before you enter the woods, right? Yeah. There's a lot of these sayings that are kind of cheesy or trite or whatever, but they do make a lot of sense when you start thinking about it, and you start thinking about everything that goes into planning and preparation for specific events, for incidents and things like that. So,
and to circle back to our friends here in the DOT in the South, they focus on, I don't know if you ever witnessed or seen the photos when there is a mass evacuation of a coastal event, how they quickly get the roads reversed in the interstates so you could have mass exodus of hundreds of thousands of cars in a short period of time. They drill that, they practice that, highway patrol gets involved. I mean, it is pure orchestration, and it's just smooth. That to imagine tens of thousands of people, tens of thousands of vehicles trying to get out of a very congested area in a short period of time, and they come on in and they just nail it. They get it right because they practiced it, they've drilled it, they've documented it, they've gone it over and over again. So for them, it's second nature, So to fair play, my criticism commentary about the not handling the salt properly, they prioritize what's most likely to happen to them: coastal weather events or snow events, and they've done wisely.
Yep, absolutely. And then the next thing is anticipating the worst. The saying is plan for the best, plan for the worst, hope for the best, right? Yeah. And I think that's very much true. And there's a lot of parallels to cybersecurity, right? We obviously don't want incidents to happen. We don't want attackers to get into our environments. We don't want to have data breaches. We don't want those things to happen. But we understand and realize that, nothing is 100% secure. Nothing is 100% foolproof. No plan is perfect, right? And especially when it comes to weather, when it comes to cybersecurity, and especially humans, there are a lot of intangibles. There are a lot of, things that can go wrong or things that can happen that we might have not forecast or didn't have the foresight to see. So I think a good planning frame of mind or frame of reference is anticipating for the worst, right? And that can help guide your strategy. So from a cybersecurity context, right? We use the term assume breach, right? We do assume breach engagements, we do internal pen tests, things like that, to help build the resilience so that we can say, okay, worst case scenario, somebody does get in your environment. We get on an endpoint, right? As an attacker, what can happen after that, right? What's the next step? What's the likely scenario that's going to happen after that? And then we start looking for vulnerabilities, misconfigurations. We look at how that organization could be more resilient after that has happened, right? And what defenses can we put in place after that point? So, Mark, what are your thoughts on kind of how you use this idea of anticipating the worst to kind of build out structure and build on the strategy for cybersecurity?
It goes back to the point, what's important to you, your prioritization, what you have going on. Someone with little kids may have a greater priority at home than, someone who with elderly people, elderly parents are taken care of. There might be health issues, concerns to factor into, and the same thing with business. You may have certain piece of infrastructure that is maybe more vulnerable or more sensitive, and you got to put your focus on that and help prioritize. It's very important to have these conversations, both as a family internally, but also as a business internally, to know what's important, because when something bad happens, everyone all wants everything all at the same time. And in the calm moment, it's better to prepare when minds are calm and collected. And when bad things happen, naturally anxiety rises and people tend to get emotional, whether they're anxious or whether they're impatient or just overall nervous or fear. That clouds judgment, and that's where you make mistakes. I've unfortunately seen in incidents where people were quick to rush into a situation and they were no better than throwing water on a grease fire. Like they responded quickly, but they handled it poorly, and it ultimately ended up not working out well for them in the end. So have your plans, do your tabletops, have your conversations when things are calm. The time to plan for a snowstorm is in June.
Yep.
And the time to plan for a cyber incident is when you currently don't have one, or at least you don't think you have one.
Yep.
Sit down, walk through all your, what's important, a prioritization, document it, especially, undivided free keys. And be honest with which you might see your weak points. If you're an organization where, Jimmy's your IT guy and Jimmy's the guy who does everything, well, what happens when, threat actors are smart if they have enough reconnaissance, or Murphy's Law can play into it. What happens when Jimmy's on his 2-week vacation to the Alps, right?
Yep.
It's not there to help you. Can your company survive that? So same thing with your home preparations, making sure you got everything all squared away. And, people running to Walmart when it's ice and snow on the ground, it's like, if you wait a few hours, let the traffic die down, let DOT crews do their thing, let the experts handle stuff. Power might get restored quickly. The things that you're concerned about may play themselves out if you just have a little patience, but then know when is your absolute, okay, I can't wait anymore. I need to evacuate, or I need to go seek resources.
And I think that's the value we provide and third-party vendors provide. And I think that's one of my jobs I see as a pen tester, to come into an organization. Let's say we're doing an assume breach engagement, internal pen test, something like that. My job, I see very much so to be the person who helps that organization, that team, kind of think outside the box a little bit, think about worst case scenario things, identify those cases where, if the worst case happens, these things are at risk. I very much see that as part of my job, to help educate and inform and kind of inspire, I guess, organizations and people to think about those things that could happen, and help organizations kind of determine what defenses could be put in place to mitigate those, to defend against those things. And I very much see that as a part of my job when I do pen tests, and that's how we engineer those exercises, those engagements to help organizations.
Yeah, and there's times where we do some consulting on the front end of an incident, help organizations get ready. One of the first questions I ask them is, what's your insurance situation like? Do you have cyber insurance? Okay, you do. Do you fully know the tools that it came with? Because some cyber insurance, no policy is identical. There's snowflakes. Some of them may actually have, you've already paid for this insurance policy. They have preparation kits. They have people that will work with you. You just need to pick up the phone call and tell them you want to engage those services. You're paying for them. That'll help you get ready. Or you may find that, you don't have enough coverage here. You don't have enough coverage to do much of anything. And if something really did happen, is there a reason why you went, skinny on the insurance? Was it a checkbox requirement where maybe your organization is ample cash and they can take the financial hit, so they're going to pay less in insurance? Or is the reverse situation where you bought insurance because you thought, okay, here's my policy, but you didn't really have it didn't line up to the needs of the business. And that could be even worse as, as we see with so many, people out in California, and of course, Florida with all the weather they had down there, is homeowners finding out that they didn't have enough coverage, or the terms of their policies changed. And now there's a situation where homeowners who are paying their bills show up to say, okay, I want my house rebuilt, and saying, no, you need to come up another $100,000 because your insurance is only covering half of that.
Yep.
So if you're relying on insurance to be the mechanism of repair, audit it heavily and line it up to your business.
Mm. Yeah, and the next one is related to layered defenses. So there are obviously parallels between layering up your clothing when you go outside in the winter, insulating your windows, insulating your home, having multiple heating sources. If you have multiple fuel sources, I know some people, especially in the Northeast, will have natural gas, but they'll also have like a propane tank, or they'll have like a wood stove, and they'll have a secondary heating source. So having those prepared, ready to go, is a good idea. And then the parallels in cybersecurity are obviously, we talk about defense in depth, layered defense heavily. This is something we talk about a lot on our podcast. These are things like your firewall, your endpoint security products, your email security, user awareness training. Maybe you have some sort of identity monitoring. Maybe you have canaries in your environment. There's a lot of things that you can put in place that are more or less layers to defend your organization, to identify attackers in your environment at different points in the environment. I'm going to be doing a webinar soon-ish in the future, in the next few months. I don't know. I'll post it on social media. But it's going to be about deceptive technology. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about is how you can layer, your deception technology so that when that alert fires, you know exactly where that attacker is, or roughly approximately where that attacker is in the context of your permissions and your role-based access control system, your tiering. If you have a canary in your environment that is only accessible to people who have IT level permissions, right? They have gained a certain amount of access in the environment. Approximately what they now have access to. So that can help, I think of that in terms of layers. So getting off track a little bit, but I'm going to be doing a webinar about deception and talking about it in layers, right? Of how you can detect threats and using canaries at different levels. But anyways, defense in depth, layered defenses, Mark. What are your thoughts on this in terms of preparation and overall just defending an organization?
Oh, I swear by the cyber kill chain. From Lockheed Martin. It sits there and it talks about every step that the adversary takes up to the final mission accomplished banner. And everything along the way, if you just take those steps and you line up to your organization, you figure out, what do I have that might be a compensating control or mitigation against each one of those. Again, anytime you stop that chain, you've won, because the attacker, the threat actor, has to get all the way to the very end, right? And if you stop them at any point along the way, that gives you your layers that, okay, my IPS didn't detect it, but my EDR did and prevented it. Or EDR was bypassed, but because I had minimal admin rights to the machine, threat actor couldn't install much. So, just take that, and you can line the cyber kill chain up against just about any workflow, any business process you have. And seriously, it just takes minutes. Map it all out and see, what do you have, and you'll quickly find out that you might have one area that maybe needs a little love, maybe a little intention, and that'll help you be smarter in your tightening of defenses, rather than just saying, well, hey, I got an ad today that this is the next greatest piece of security software, I should probably go out and get that. You might find out that you're too front loaded on one aspect of that cyber chain, and it's kind of like putting all your battleships up front. That submarine snuck underneath all your battleships, your port's wide open, right? No pun intended.
Yep. That's why I love purple teams. That's why I love assume breach engagements, because during an assume breach engagement with us, for example, we're going to find a number of different ways to attack the environment. We'll probably get elevated permissions or privileges in the environment. And we're going to find things that we're alerted on and we're blocked, but we're also going to identify things that we're not alerted, we're not identified, there were no logs, there's no telemetry that we have observed that happened, during that engagement. And what's great about that is we can say, hey, you detected the Kerber roasting. Great. We cracked the account though, and we use that account and we, use some remote, we use some lateral movement technique. Maybe it's RDP, maybe it's PS remoting, maybe it's WMI exec or whatever the case may be. But let's say the Kerber roasting was detected, we cracked the account, it had a weak password, and we use that account to pivot to a domain controller, say, from the pen testing machine that we started from, or the untrusted host, right? So the scenario here in a real life scenario would be Susie in accounting's machine gets compromised, Kerber roasting happens, and then that threat actor pivots to the domain controller using that admin account that was just acquired. You detected that Kerber roasting, great, but let's say maybe somebody misses it, the SOC misses it, or it wasn't identified, or it was tossed up as a false positive. Let's say that lateral movement wasn't detected, right? That's a gap in the layered defense strategy of the organization. So what I love about the assumed breach engagements is, sure, they detected Kerber roasting, but they didn't detect this thing. It's not a binary 1 or 0 like we detected you, we didn't. It's more of a collaborative thing to say, here's all the things that were detected, here's all the things that weren't. And it's a great way to find holes in that layered defense strategy, because when a threat actor gets in, they're going to be Kerber roasting. They're going to be looking for things typically. Looking for ways to move laterally and things like that. So if we can identify those things early on, organizations are much more well suited to be more resilient to attack.
Yeah, and both assumed breach and cyber kill chain allows you to really distill down on a couple of bullet points for management. Because let's face it, security can do so much. Ultimately, management has to provide the funding, provide the governance to push forward. When you say, hey, we're secure, but out of these 7 bullet points, 2 of them need improvement, they get that. They don't need to know the technical zeros and ones. When you say, I want to spend money on these 2 because these other 5 have been vetted by security professionals and say these are good, but these 2 over here, if we bolster these up, now we have 7 layers of defense versus 5 or 4.5. That's how you can quickly win the elevator speak to get your projects funded, to get the initiatives going, chip away at these things a little bit at a time.
Yep. And the next step is monitoring. So monitoring, in the context of a storm, right? We want to monitor the conditions, right? If there's tornado warnings, if there's winter storm warnings, etc., monitoring the conditions closely, monitoring for changes. And being able to have notifications, when those things change, when those conditions change, or when things arise, new events arise. Same thing with security, right? We want to be, not reliant on one thing alone, and that kind of goes back to the layered defenses. And something I forgot to mention was the opposite of layered defenses is relying on one thing alone, right? Putting all your eggs in one basket. Let's say you just have EDR. And maybe you have some email security product, but you just mainly rely on EDR. That's a lack of planning and strategy in your security plan, right? But when it comes to monitoring, right, you want to be able to monitor the things that are important. So your endpoints, obviously, with EDR, network, and identities are kind of the big 3, in my opinion. That should have some sort of monitoring in place. Let's say the EDR fails to detect, the bad thing in the environment, right? Or on that specific endpoint. Or maybe the threat actor was really good and they were able to bypass those defenses or obfuscate their tools or their malware such that it didn't get detected on the endpoint. Well, maybe we can identify when an admin account logs into a domain controller from, like the example earlier, Susie in accounting's machine. Susie in accounting, her machine should never need to, initiate RDP to a domain controller, right? So those are things that we can pick up on and detect. And when it comes to, monitoring, Mark, what have you seen in your experience that's been helpful from a monitoring standpoint, if you were to look back on the incident response cases, like what were the things that were like, oh, we could monitor for that, or in retrospectives that you were like, yeah, we can kind of bolster the defenses in this area?
So spawn out of monitoring is response, right? The whole idea of being alerted to something is you're going to react to something. We have early storm detection, so we're told, prepare yourself, hey, seek shelter, or, get out of the way. Same thing with monitoring. If alerts come in, I get some companies, they're a small IT shop, and the IT staff like, oh yeah, we check our phones, and when an alert comes in, we respond to it. You check your phone when you're in a movie theater, right? And then you get the alert, and then you got to go out to your car and fire up your laptop and your hotspot, or maybe drive home. We've seen incidents that have within the hour, within the 30 minutes, we're seeing bad things happen to organizations. And if you're not in a position where, time matters, where flip side, we've had victories where proactive monitoring and good service level agreements saying somebody came in, got people involved, did the response, complete, remediation and eradication within 15 minutes, that makes it extremely difficult for a threat actor to do harm. And is the flip side of things. So it's kind of like if you're having monitoring for your storm, if you're not always watching the weather alert channel or listening to the weather radio, you might miss that notification that like evacuate now. And the same thing goes is if you try to do it yourself, if you're a large organization with staff and resources and you want to do it yourself, absolutely, you can get yourself set up, engage people to help you get set up if you don't already. But if you're smaller, it's come to the point now where you need constant monitoring because the small guys are getting picked off left and right, and they're just being taken advantage of because they can't afford security posture. But good partnerships with a SOC like ours can be all the difference in the world between good days and bad days when the alerts come in.
Yeah, it's becoming increasingly more difficult to maintain the pace of threat detection, threat hunting, for organizations to do it themselves, right? And it's becoming more and more cost prohibitive, right? These SIMs, a decent SIM is going to cost you $100,000 bare minimum, and that's just on the lower end, right? And that's just a SIM, right? You still need to pay for your EDR licensing. You still need to monitor those things. You need to set up orchestration so that if something bad happens, that account that was used is automatically disabled and it's automatically logged out. Those are things that are more or less becoming table stakes, right? If you don't have some sort of SOC or SIM that's managed and it's monitored on a regular basis, and you have some way to quickly identify those threats and quickly quarantine them, it's going to directly correlate to that organization's direct financial loss, and maybe even worse. And not to be so like fear and uncertainty, doubt, not to be so FUD oriented, because a lot of threat actors are not very sophisticated, right? They're script kiddies. They're just like spray and pray, and like you can most organizations are well positioned for EDR and kind of that orchestration process to deal with that. But take, for example, a situation where you're a law firm, right? And somebody, some threat actor or some threat group hires a legitimate lawyer, like an actual lawyer with an actual background and history and all that, to apply for a job at your firm, get hired by that firm, and then hand off the credentials to the threat actor, right? And now the threat actor has a way in. They look just like a regular user. The traffic looks all normal, and they're just like kind of slowly probing the environment, trying to figure out where their weak points are, what they're going to attack, kind of what their game plan is. And maybe 4, 5, 6 months down the line, they are doing things that are more noisy, and then they trip up. But they've been 5, 6 months in the environment, right, to do their thing, to siphon data out. So I think, in my opinion, monitoring especially is becoming more and more difficult, because threat actors are improving, defenses are also improving, but I just think it's getting more and more difficult to do it in a DIY type of fashion.
Yeah, there's some hidden costs behind, there's a price tag for the SIM, but then most SIMs are going to require constant curation. So that's at least one FTE, right? Someone whose whole job is to make sure the SIM is working right, like making sure that everything's being fine tuned, false positives, false negatives are being addressed. But then if you're just going off of the information the SIM has today, you're never going to prepare for tomorrow's event, right? Because everything keeps changing. So now you're talking subscriptions to data feeds. And, some of these, we can get data enrichment tools that you can pay subscriptions for. So now that bolsters out. Now you're one group, you're one team of people trying to take on the world versus going with a managed security provider, someone who's already doing that for hundreds of customers, right? You're getting the benefit of it's the rather than having one sentry on the corner of the castle, you've got 10,000 eyes, right? Because things happening to other people around the world, across the country, there's enough stuff happening, and eventually threat actors trip over themselves, or they hit enough people that you start recognizing patterns, and that stuff gets pulled out, and creates IOCs and stuff of that nature. So yes, so someone's bad news yesterday could be your good news today because they were hacked. Their how they were compromised was captured, put into a SIM, enriched. And then when the threat actor tried to do that to you, detections were had, responses were had, and eradication happened before damage happened, right? And DIY, the smaller, medium-sized companies, if you just hear all those steps I took to take, there's no way you can pay for it. And that's why threat actors continue to go after smaller companies. And, these smaller guys need the help.
Yeah, and this circles back to the response plans, right? We talked about this in the very first, stage, which is preparation, but response plans are critical. We talked about that a little bit already. Incident response plans, having a list of vendors of who you need to contact, when you need to contact them, your DR plan of how you recover your systems, how you bring your processes back online, where that happens. Does it happen at a remote site, at some, warm site, whatever. But response plans are obviously very critical. It goes without saying that, one of the first things, if you're a new CISO or a new IT director at an organization, right, if you just get hired and you're the guy that's in charge, the very first thing I think that is most important is your incident response and your disaster recovery plans, your contingency planning, right? Your business continuity is the most important thing, right? At the end of the day, we're here because most organizations are for profit, right? They sell a service or a product or a thing for money. And IT's job, security's job is to make sure that that organization can continue making money and continue being competitive in their market. And that's our sole focus, right? That's our sole job, to make sure that the business stays up and stays running and stays efficient and all that. So I think response planning, continuity planning is the most important thing that you have to think about before anything else. So next on the list, I don't know if we'll get through all of them, but there's a couple other ones I want to mention, that being automation. So I just said, you're dead in the water if you don't have automation and have some sort of orchestration for when incidents happen and things like that. That being said, I think it's not always a binary thing of like, you need this, you need that. But I think relying solely on automation, and maybe automation is the wrong word here, but relying solely on our tools and on our technology without understanding the underlying principles, So if you're an IT admin or a security person, it's great to have EDR, it's great to have firewalls, it's great to have all these security tools, but I do think it's helpful to understand, at least in some way, how they work so that you know when they're not working, right? Or when or can identify when they're not being effective, or if they're not doing their job, or if something fails and you need to troubleshoot it. There's a lot of reasons why you should have some sort of understanding of these tools and what they're doing, because otherwise, you just buy a product and you install it and you have no idea if it's working. Let's take, for example, EDR. You buy a really expensive EDR product and you plug it in. It's like, okay, we're good. And you get no alerts, like nothing. You get no alerts. And you're like, is it working? I don't know. Is it not? It's like that meme of like, not sure if it's good or not. But I think relying solely on automation, or not relying solely on automation and kind of our tools is an important lesson with in this. Do you agree, Mark? What are your thoughts on that?
So it goes back to your planning and capturing it in your plan, right? And you should, as you go through your incident response plan or your disaster recovery plan, identify how you're going to respond to something. Now you got to keep in mind, like, what happens if that fails? What's your fallback, right? Because again, if you invested in a home generator, what happens that, Murphy's Law, the moment you need it, it malfunctions, right? It's not outputting any energy or sufficient needs, right? So having thought out, in clear mind, what are my options here, right? But also understanding some of the capabilities. Like I mentioned the start of the podcast, that when I bought this battery charger, a little jump starter kit for my car, I have a nose on the side of it, a bunch of USB ports on it. So this thing is a big giant battery, strong enough to jumpstart a car. So when my house lost power for several hours, I knew I was not concerned about having to run out to my car and start my car and plug my phone in and recharge that way. I went out my garage and grabbed my battery pack and went to Plan B and ran off of that for probably 8-9 hours. That's how strong that battery was. So knowing your capabilities and knowing when something doesn't work, that's something you need to capture in your planning. And but also, okay, if we were truly hitting the dark of night and we're hitting freezing temperatures, what are my plans here? What do I need to do to go out elsewhere?
Yep. And communication is a big component of that. Yeah. We've touched on it here and there throughout this episode, but when it comes to natural disasters and storms, having an alert system or a warning system, having a way to communicate with family, if school's in session, family members who are at work, things like that. But from a cybersecurity context, we want to have clear communication between leadership, between the IT teams, between whoever may be affected. That might be third parties, that might be customers or clients. So communication is obviously a very core component of all of this. So I'm curious, Mark, from your perspective, when it comes to incident response, cybersecurity in general, how do you think about communication for cybersecurity?
So communication should have its own plan, and if you do follow, like ISO 27001, there's actual requirement for having a communications plan, not just internally but externally. And along with communication comes education. Yes, you need to lay out, here's how we're going to communicate with each other if we have an incident, but also setting for the expectations as far as maybe internal communications, like, hey, when IT announces they're working on something, don't call them every 5 minutes and ask them if when is someone going to send someone down to fix the printer. Don't ask them, are we fixed yet? Or ask them, hey, what can you tell me? Like, let them do their job, right? And that's where it's
like when your kids are like, are we there yet? It's like, hey, is it fixed yet? Hey, IT.
And this curiosity, especially when someone's like, ooh, we have an attack, we have an incident, and the masses hear something, like, of course curiosity comes in, and the gossip queens are going to put their ears to the ground to hope that they could quickly tweet or repost something or talk to someone at the water cooler about it. But setting forth the communication expectations, like, look, we're not talking about anything, and if we don't answer the phone, it's because we're busy. Setting all that stuff out in motion can definitely negate a lot of angst, because there might be some people who are totally in their own little world, and they pick up the phone like, why isn't IT answering my call? Not realizing that the world's burning down around them. We've seen people like that in all walks of life. So, having that communication plan out, having it communicated to the end users, knowing what the expectations are, especially with regards to privacy, like not posting, not talking about anything. Lets people say no one is authorized to speak on behalf of the company unless they, come directly from, person X, who that person's been identified ahead of time, or department X. So just because you work for, Acme Tool Company and, want to post the latest on the Coyote, doesn't mean you're authorized to do so, right? You don't represent Acme. You just sit there and collect your check.
Yep. Yeah, and communication really is very crucial And the more you're able to establish that communication before an incident, like you mentioned, the better it's going to generally result during, an incident or an event or something like that. And you mentioned this as well, but I'll reiterate, just goes back to your planning. Planning is so important, and communication should be in that plan. How you're going to communicate and all those things that you mentioned are really important. So,
yeah, prioritization is there. Letting people responding handle their job, do their job, and not creating extra chaff.
Yep.
We keep hearing stories, about 911 departments getting phone calls from people saying, "Hey, is the Walmart open today?" It's like they're handling emergencies. They're dealing with other issues. Their job in life is not to keep calling Walmart every 10 minutes to see if someone answers the phone, right? Prioritize that. Focus, maybe in life, that things might not be that important, and take a few minutes, go sip your coffee, and enjoy the moment of quiet.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the whole goal here in my mind is resilience, right? Nothing is preventable. Nothing is fully 100% preventable. Obviously, with natural disasters, it's no way, shape, or form preventable usually for most things, but you can be prepared, right? In the case of winter storms, which is something I deal with often, being in the Northeast, and you're familiar with it, Mark. But it's just making sure your house is in order. All the stuff we already talked about, right? I don't want to go through and rehash everything, but it's all for resilience, right? It's all for being able to withstand and kind of bounce back from an attack, from an incident, from those things. And making sure that your systems, your processes, your tools, users, your organization is resilient to those things. And that is really the goal of this discussion. That's the whole reason we have the cybersecurity industry, to begin with.
And the best time of preparation is before something actually happens. In the Northeast, I remember in the summertime seeing DOT crews constantly cutting down tree limbs, and we would curse at them as we drove by because they were shutting down lanes of traffic, and I was too busy to get where I wanted to go. But I was grateful in the wintertime, the fact that those trees had less limbs to collect snow, and limbs did not bring down power lines and then knock out power, which meant I had heat, electricity during the storm. So that kind of preparation was ahead of time, and they weren't out there the day before the snow was going to fall trying to cut the limbs down. They were planning well ahead.
Yep. Yeah. So, that's really it. I want to start wrapping it up there. Any last minute thoughts, Mark, on kind of preparation, kind of preparing for the worst, the kind of thing?
No, I think the idea, your analogy of Mother Nature versus cyber threat actors kind of is one and the same. The fact that we constantly tell organizations it's not your fault that the threat actor was bigger, stronger, better funded than you were, which, like you pointed out, Mother Nature. No one's bigger, stronger, or more powerful than Mother Nature. So since you can't beat it head on, you just need to, do your risk assessment. Think about what's important to you. If something was to happen, what are things you have in place to mitigate it or to transfer the risk? Whether it's, leaving the area, evacuating, or engaging insurance after the fact, making sure you have the right insurance. That kind of preparation, communication along those lines. Knowing, what's important, and then mixed in the middle that was the monitoring, the detection, the warnings, and being able to properly respond to that. Sometimes we do get hamstrung, but plan out those what if scenarios. Hey, if I can't do X, can I pivot to Y? Will that still get me to the same path? Eventually.
Yep. Yeah, and forgive me for using the CISSP terminology, but I think of due diligence and due care, right? There's a difference between due diligence and due care, and I think you need both in the context of cybersecurity, and especially with preparation.
Yeah.
So, that's our episode for today. Thank you all for listening. Something I forgot to mention at the beginning of the episode is I'll be trying a Friday release now, and I'll be posting about this on social media, but just the way the week works, and kind of so we can get some better quality episodes in within our kind of workflow, we're going to try for a Friday release for our podcast episode. So that's our episode. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope that was helpful and got some gears turning for you in terms of how you can think about cybersecurity and your plan and your strategy for this year. So if this was interesting at all, let us know. Send me an email or DM us or post on social media or something if you like this type of kind of strategy level discussion, and we'll be sure to do more of it. But you can check us out at offsec.blog and at scareit360.com, and we will see you next week. Thanks, everybody.